Namam Vishnupadaya Krishnapastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Tirtha Swaminiti Namine Namaste Krishnapadaya Prabhupada Shritatmane Gaura Karuna Shakti Bhakti Tirtha Namine Namam Vishnupadaya Krishnapastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswat Devam Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadim Paschate Desatarine. Hare Krishna. Thank you for having me. It's a very, it's really an honor, and it's also a very pleasant surprise to see the extraordinary forms of the Lord present here. I was just remarking to Prabhu that Srila Prabhupada, when he began the mission on 2nd Avenue in New York City, Matchless Gifts, the first picture that he brought in was a picture of the Panchatattva. I think it was Panchatattva who was practically on the altar for many, many years. And then in the present day, of course, we have Srila Prabhupada. So Sri Panchatattva being present in any kshetra is of great significance. Perhaps Newcastle is going to be a pioneer in certain ways, which we don't really conceive of, because it's quite poignant and very amazing that the deities here are Panchatattva deities. So, so most importantly, I was asked to speak on Bhagavad Gita, but then I thought that we would also talk upon a certain aspect of our tradition. We'll touch upon general spirituality. We will talk about why we are special. You know, why is the presentation of Lord Chaitanya, why is the presentation of Srila Rupa Goswami so special in distinction from other generalized spiritual practices? And then we start looking at the process. We start looking at the challenges faced by practitioners. We start looking at the expectation of what the acaryas expect of us to be able to mitigate the challenges. Because Krishna consciousness is a long haul. It's a 40-year, 50-year haul. Even if you were to begin at the age of 20, it's such a long haul that there are so many different intricacies and aspects of it which have to be very consistent for things to work out over a long period of time. Life has to practically adjust itself in so many profound ways for us to be able to embrace the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So the question then becomes that in the modern context, we are not so many of us who live in the temples, where our practice is restricted to devotional service right from morning to evening, in terms of strictly practicing the tenets of Krishna consciousness throughout the day, directly serving the movement. Many of us, practically most of us, are outside the temple. We are congregation based. We come perhaps once a week. We do have a personal practice that we take on every day. So how do we fit in, and what is the context? What is the specific demand of the acaryas, of people who practice outside? Because it's actually very practical. I have been a practitioner, but I've always been outside. I've not been a member of an ashram, of a brahmacharya ashram or a temple, but then I've traveled around. I've always been outside. I've been working, and then it has its own flavor in terms of challenges. It also presents its opportunities. We want to be able to examine that in light of the original teachings of the acaryas. Where are we in terms of what they wanted us to do? Where are the distractions, and how do we mitigate those? So we're going to draw upon several scriptures. I will not be mentioning the scripture in particular. Perhaps we'll draw upon the works of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur from the Madhurya Kadambini. We will touch upon the Bhagavad Gita. We will also look upon other teachings from the Bhagavatam and so on as we go along in today's discussion. And the most important thing that we would want to understand is that any bona fide religious practice, I'm using the word religion because religion eventually sets up a platform or a foundation for one to enter into spirituality. Religion on its own is a platform. That platform allows one to enter into spirituality if it is practiced sincerely over several lifetimes. It does produce a few credits. It provides a foundation. The foundation is akin to going to a prep school before entering a major university. So if you want to enter into Harvard or Yale in America, or perhaps Oxford and Cambridge here in the UK, then you are entering into a prep school for you to have maximum success. And those who enter into the prep school have a better chance of success once they enter into the university, purely because they've been trained in certain ways. So in such direction, even though the bhakti, the platform of bhakti to the Lord, is not dependent on credits, it is not dependent on the foundation, she is quite independent. The one who has foundation has a better ability to be able to consistently practice the science of Krishna consciousness over several years. So the most important thing that we want to understand is, what is the purpose of religion? What is the purpose of religion? The primary purpose of religion is to eventually allow us to understand who we are, to understand who the Lord is, to understand the sambandha between us and the Lord, and then after understanding the specific relationship one has between us and the Lord, one then begins to act in knowledge in that relationship, and that action is abhideya, and then eventually one comes to prayojana tattva of being able to call upon Krishna in his pure name, Shuddhanam. We hear the word Shuddhanam. What is Shuddhanam? Because the goal has to be defined before we start defining the process. Shuddhanam specifically is the name of the Lord called upon by devotees who have established a firm relationship of purity with Him. In the sense, they know who they are in relationship to Krishna. In Vraja, Mother Yashoda calls Krishna, that is Shuddhanam. There's no confusion in her head as to who is Krishna. He's my son. She is not even confused about his opulence. She is not confused and distracted by the fact that he is even God. She is saying, this is my son. You see, that is Shuddhanam. The Gopals, the cowherd boys in Vraja calling upon Krishna as their dearmost friend, calling upon him and beckoning him to play and to share their prasad, to eat with him. That call is Shuddhanam, because they are not confused, neither are they misdirected, neither are they even situated in any other identity other than the identity of being related to Krishna. So that is Shuddhanam. So Shuddhanam is the goal, the pure name is the goal, where we establish a relationship with the Lord. This particular idea of wanting to establish a relationship, acting upon that relationship, ultimately to be able to relish the chanting of the pure name. Ultimately you start with the name and then you end up chanting the pure name. So the sadhana and the sadhya are the same. So this process of being able to come in touch with the Lord, understanding a relationship, acting upon that relationship, ultimately to practically have an exchange of love. This is the fundamental goal of any religious, spiritual practice. If religion and spirituality does not have this goal of being able to offer us the connection with the Lord, then such a religion, such spirituality is not consistent with teachings of Scripture. It is not consistent. We don't have consistency. The consistency comes in the fact that it has to establish sambandha. And Krishna sambandha is being established by our deity worship. It is being established by so many other aspects which we will look at closely. The fact remains that sambandha is the most important thing. How is it and what is the practice which is going to get us to know Krishna and know ourselves in relationship to Krishna fully well so that we can render service? And Krishna in verse 4.9 of the Bhagavad Gita, in 4.9, he is talking about it. It's the very famous verse, and he is making this statement very clearly. He's saying, Janma karma chame divyam, evam yo vetti tattvataha, tektva deham punarjanmaneti mam, etisho arjuna. He is using a very specific word here in this verse, and it's very specific for us to make a note of it. He is using the word tattva. He's saying, Janma karma chame divyam, evam yo vetti tattvataha. He's saying, one has to understand me through the process of tattva. And let's read the translation. The translation goes, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not upon leaving the body take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not upon leaving the body take birth again. Krishna is practically saying, in Sanskrit, it's even more profound. He is using the word tattvataha. He's saying, your considerations of trying to understand me cannot be based on apparent considerations. It cannot be based on your senses. You cannot really make relative considerations of trying to understand who I am. You can't. You will not understand me. He says, you have to approach tattva. He's saying you have to approach tattva, which is the absolute consideration of understanding Godhead. How do we understand Krishna? It has to be through tattva. Now, what is tattva? Tattva is as described in bona fide scripture and as enunciated by the disciplic succession. This is tattva. Krishna says, if you don't approach tattva, you won't understand me. Now, he's repeating this instruction again. He's repeating it further down in the same chapter, and this is verse number 4.34, which is very famous again. Very well-known verse. Tadviddi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya Upadekshyanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. He is using the word tattva again in this verse, tattvadarshinaha. Now in this verse he is saying, just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. Now he's saying, you can only understand me through tattva. And then in 4.34 he's saying, go approach a tattvadarshi. Go approach someone who has seen tattva. Tattva darshan. Someone who has understood tattva. Someone who has realized scripture. When Srila Vyasadeva was writing that Kshirodakashayi Vishnu, the Lord of the causal ocean, is lying in the causal ocean. He breathes in, the universes enter into the pores of his skin. He breathes out, universes become manifest again. When Srila Vyasadeva was writing this, he was seeing this. Please understand, he was seeing this. He was seeing the gigantic form of Sri Vamanadev. When he grew gigantic, he became Trivikrama. He placed his foot on Bali Maharaj's head. Srila Vyasadeva was seeing this. He was practically having darshan. That is tattva darshan. He was seeing it. And because he was seeing it, and when he records it in scripture, that becomes potent enough to immediately give us faith when we come in touch with such potent scripture. Why? Because tattva darshan has occurred. Krishna is directing us. You see, you cannot understand, we cannot really absorb the activities of Krishna from Srimad Bhagavatam directly. The cue to approach Srimad Bhagavatam is being given in the Bhagavad Gita. So we approach the Bhagavatam through the Bhagavad Gita, where the Bhagavad Gita is saying, you want to learn Tattva Darshan, you have to go to someone who has seen it. Who has seen it, who has realized. He has seen me and he has realized the activities in Braja. He has done this. You have to approach someone who is bona fide. And he is reiterating that in 4.34. He's practically saying, approach someone who is a Tattvadarshi. A Tattvadarshi would be able to set things right for you. Approach a Tattvadarshi. Now comes the question. Many of us, practically everyone, have come in touch with this bona fide movement that has descended from Srila Vyasadeva. We have had the great good fortune of coming under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada, who practically offered 60 volumes of Tattva Darshan. I was born, he introduced me as someone who was born and who was raised in the Sri Sampradaya, the Ramanuja Sampradaya, which is in South India. It's a very strict tradition. But none of that was ever clarified to me until I came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's teachings. Until I got initiated, I wasn't even clear on the teachings of the other parampara that I was born in, because it was Srila Prabhupada's mercy that allowed me to be able to understand the profundity of what was offered in the other bona fide Vaishnava paramparas. You see? The point which I'm trying to make here is that we are a part of a bona fide sampradaya. We are receiving direct knowledge from those who have seen the truth. They are Tattvadarshis. Right? Then the question again becomes, is that if we are coming so close to such profundity, such extraordinary power, then why is there such a struggle for the practitioners of Krishna consciousness in the modern times? Or even in the past for that matter? Isn't this a question that we ought to be asking? That we are plugging in to a bona fide parampara just as much as Krishna directed us to. Then why is there a struggle? What is the struggle coming from? Where is the struggle coming from? You see? This requires a bit of going back to basics. Going back to basics to see how this was practiced 500 years back, what was emphasized, and what is really the nuts and bolts of Krishna consciousness. What is it which is required of us by Srila Rupa Goswami, by the 6 Goswamis? What did they do? We should remember a simple fact, that our inspiration today is the inspiration that is being drawn from the extraordinarily strict practice of certain tenets by the 6 Goswamis and their associates. They did not have the ability to transmit through the internet, of telephones and so on and so forth. They had a power which could transmit their realizations 500 years hence and could inspire millions, which is what our case is. We are being inspired by a handful of men who were sincere enough to sit and do what the precepts of Krishna consciousness was, and the profundity and the enormity of their practice and the sincerity was so powerful and it was so pure that we are practically thriving on their realizations. You see, on our own, Srila Prabhupada wrote based on the teachings of Srila Rupa Goswami. He wrote on the teachings of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. All his purports were drawn from these great personalities. But then what did they do? That their potency was such that it was inspiring hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and it is still being glorified, and it is going to glow like anything. So there is something about it which we need to go and closely examine to the core practices. The core practices are so important. That's the legacy that's been passed on to us. The legacy that's been passed on to us is a legacy of a handful of devotees, men and women, very sincere men and women who are associated with the Supreme Lord, who are His personal associates, and they did something. They had a set of practices. They had a set of core practices which they held on to. And that purity is such that it is transmitting itself 500 years hence, and we are being inspired by it. So that is something which we need to pay attention to. Okay? So, we're going to look at that. Now, if we look at the fundamental challenges faced by devotees of Krishna consciousness, or anybody for that matter who is serious in spiritual work, the fundamental challenges are that they are unhappy. They are quite distressed. You see? Devotional service and the chanting of the Mahamantra has goals. The goals are, number one, Kleshagni, and the other is Shubhada. Shubhada is the bestower of good fortune. The holy name is the bestower of good fortune. And Kleshagni, Klesha is the suffering that is a part of existence in this material world. Agni is the complete elimination, eradication, burning of such suffering. So this is the goal at a very preliminary stage. When one is chanting Namaparad, when one is chanting the offensive name, they get their material desires granted one way or the other, which in turn does not help them move forward. They get it granted. When one is chanting the offenseless name, Namabas, they get liberated. Offenseless name. And Namabas is the stage of liberation where this Kleshagni occurs, where there is complete elimination of distress. And this is just the offenseless name. We are not at the stage of Shuddhanam, which is further away. The pure name is further away. This is the offenseless name. The offenseless name has the capacity to liberate. The pure name is further out. So the point is that there is a distress in the Krishna conscious community as well, amongst the practitioners. Those of us who enter into Krishna consciousness, we enter into Krishna consciousness due to several ways. What Krishna says this in 7.16 of the Bhagavad Gita. What does he say in 7.16? He is saying, one moment please, someone has really done a good job of reading this book. Yeah, it's in a bit of a tatters. Okay, so what does Krishna say? He says, Chaturvida bhajante ma jana sukritino arjuna arto jigyasurattati jnani cha bharatarishaba. O best among Bharatas, 4 kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto me. The distressed, desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the Absolute. Now, if we were to go into any congregation around the world, of any one of our societies, and we ask people to raise their hands, that do they fit into these categories? Yes, we are practitioners of Krishna consciousness, but are we falling into one of these categories? Are we ones who want our distress removed? There will be show of hands. Okay? Are we desirous of wealth? There would be show of hands. Yes, please. I need some material adjustment. Are we inquisitive? There would be show of hands. The point we are trying to make here is that 7.16 describes 99% of the congregation that we have. 7.16 is describing 99% of the congregation. And Krishna is saying this is magnanimous. Srila Rupa Goswami is saying this is Mishra Bhakti. He is saying this is mixed devotional service. He is saying this is not pure devotion. Pure devotion is defined by Srila Rupa Goswami, and what does he say? Anya bilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavritam anukulyena Krishna anushilanam bhakti uttama. He is saying Uttama Bhakti cannot have motives for wealth. It cannot have motives for relief of distress. It cannot have this, I want to be relieved from my suffering. This cannot be a motive for getting Krishna. Krishna will say, you want to be relieved of your suffering? Yes, so be it. This is granted. You want wealth? Yes, so be it. It is granted. But he will not give himself. He will not. Anya abhilashita shunyam. That is the definition of pure bhakti. So we will not have the objective of being able to chant Shuddha Naam until we transfer and move out of 7.16. We can't move out of 7.16 unless we understand that we need to. What did we say earlier? We said that just offenseless chanting of the holy names grants us liberation, which is relief from all distress. Offenseless chanting. Our goal is pure chanting. You see, there's a distinction. Pure chanting, I defined it earlier on in the talk. Pure chanting is when the knowledge of our relationship with Krishna is revealed in greater degrees. That is pure chanting, because we're going to call upon him with affection. There's a certain identity which we're going to assume, and we're going to call upon him. Every one of us present has an identity in the spiritual world. In Krishna's little village, when we chant the pure name, or when we approach the quality of chanting the pure name, in the little village of Vraja and the villages surrounding Vraja, we will know what is our name in one of those villages. Which village do we belong to? We would know what is the name of our parents. We would know the name of our siblings. We would know what kind of service we render. And this is all being offered by the holy name. And when we do that, then that is calling upon Shuddhanam. That is Shuddhanam, and all those knowledges are part of us. Sambandha is fully known. Isn't it? But when Krishna is saying, Rupa Goswami is saying, Srila Rupa Goswami is saying, that when you're going to be approaching Krishna for wealth, when you're going to be approaching him for relief of distress, then there would be relief of distress and there would be wealth, undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. Many of our practitioners do see this happen. You would find that for many years, they are serving as pujaris in perhaps Mayapur, Vrindavan. They may not have the basic material qualification for them to build resources. All of a sudden, you will notice they come into resources. They do. Why so? It is because they are building a foundation of credits, and those credits in combination with their desires is granting those desires. Do you understand? So, the point we want to make here is that please understand that we are in 7.16. That is not the goal of the Bhagavad Gita. We have 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita, the last we looked at it. This is 7.16. Here's where most of us are, in 7.16. We need to move from 7.16 to the 18th chapter. And that is the process of sadhana bhakti. Isn't it? That is the process of sadhana bhakti. Now, what is the nature of distress which a practitioner goes through? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur talks about 5 types of distress. Okay? 5 causes of distress. Someone is suffering. They really are suffering. They're in pain. You see? But they're in touch with the highest knowledge. But they're in pain. They're suffering. So what could be the causes of suffering when you're in touch with such an amazing process? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is giving us 5 reasons for suffering. First reason for suffering, he says there's a lack of knowledge. There's a lack of knowledge. I give this example, a normal example. And is anybody here who is a physician? Okay. You are a physician. Okay. Retired. Doesn't matter. You have been a physician. So there are some experiences. You see, the modern day, if someone were to wake up, there's a lack of knowledge. I'm just trying to give you an example. If you were to wake up with a tummy ache, my tummy is aching on the right side of my body. This is 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm really struggling. I call work and I tell them I'm not coming in today because I have a tummy ache. I do not know the case with the UK, but in America, unless you go to the emergency room, your doctor wouldn't see you unless there's an appointment. So I wait until 9 o'clock when the doctor's office opens and I fix an appointment, and he says come in at 2 o'clock. So between 8 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock, now I have this pain, a tummy ache, and I'm suffering like anything. Now, someone suggests, why don't you go online to WebMD and look up whether there's any symptom there which matches yours. Perhaps you'll have a clue as to what disease you have. So, okay, we go to WebMD and I say right side pain, lower abdomen, and then I put all this information in Google, and then a whole bunch of results start popping out. One of the results says this could be just gas, it could be an inflamed appendicitis, situation, or it could be some kind of liver problem, it could be a pancreas problem. It just goes on and on and on, and it says it could be cancer. You can't really ignore it. The point is, you get a whole list on Google. Now, what happens to someone who has a tummy ache, who has read this big laundry list of symptoms? What happens to them? Does the suffering increase or does it decrease? It increases. It increases because now they become even more anxious, thinking, oh, I could be suffering from this, I could be suffering from that, I could be suffering from this. The anxiety goes on. Now, let me ask you this. Has their pain increased or has it stayed the same? The pain is the same, the suffering has increased. Okay? Because now there's great confusion. There's even greater confusion than they started out with, because they went online, they tried to do some research. Then comes 2 o'clock, they get the doctor's appointment. By now they are in cold sweat. They really think something is wrong with them because they haven't recovered with the normal ginger tea or whatever it is. And they go there to the doctor's office at 2 o'clock. The doctor makes them lie down on the table, starts poking around their tummy. And then he does not do any elaborate examination. He tells them, oh, this is just gas. You might have eaten something which was probably, not supposed to be eaten. You shouldn't have eaten. It's just gas. You're just having a gas problem. Now, let me ask you this. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, what happens to the pain? I'm sorry? Pain. Underline the word pain. What happens to the pain? It stays the same, because the doctor has not medicated the patient. The doctor has merely made an examination. Now, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, after the doctor's examination, what happens to the suffering? Goes down. So what was the difference between the morning and the afternoon? What came in? Knowledge. Knowledge. Knowledge was given. And even though there was pain, suffering disappeared because knowledge became apparent. Does it make sense as to how profound is the statement from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, one of our most prominent acaryas? Lack of knowledge is the cause of suffering. Number one cause, as a lack of knowledge. You haven't really figured out who you are in relationship to Krishna. We haven't even figured out what the relationship is. And there isn't a profound practice. As a consequence, there's suffering. How could Lord Jesus be crucified and yet forgive? He was in pain, but he wasn't suffering, and that's why he could forgive. There's a big difference between pain and suffering. He was in pain, but he wasn't suffering. He could forgive. What was the condition of Srila Haridas Thakur when he forgave the miscreants who flogged him in 22 marketplaces because he was chanting the holy names? He was in terrible pain, but he wasn't suffering. Obviously there were lashes which the Lord himself took on. But the point which we're trying to make here is that there could have been pain potentially because he was being harmed at a physical level. But he wasn't suffering, and that allowed him to forgive. You can't forgive unless there is no suffering. Forgiveness is possible when there's no suffering. When there's pain, you can still forgive as long as you're not suffering. So you could go to a physician, you could heal yourself, and the pain could disappear, the suffering could continue. That's the other possibility. You see? The suffering could continue. Oh, this happened, this happened, this happened. I went through this hell, and why did it happen to me? Why did this happen to me? I shouldn't have gone through this terrible experience. The pain ends, suffering continues. Sometimes the pain continues and the suffering ends. So the point we want to make here is that knowledge plays such a critical role in simply understanding how to process events in life. 99% of people, they fail in spiritual practice because they really are not clear on how to process events in their life. There are auspicious and there are inauspicious events that take place, which is the nature of material life. If you do not know how to process an event, then that's where the failing comes in. And the processing of an event requires knowledge. And that knowledge is available from scripture. It's available from the spiritual master. It's available through the practice of the holy names. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is saying, number one cause of suffering, lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge. I want to just briefly touch upon what is the qualification to come into knowledge. What is it which allows us to seek a solution? You see, what allows us to seek a solution depends on our consciousness. based on our consciousness, it is programmed. If you have a certain consciousness, you're going to go out and seek a solution based on the consciousness. Someone with a low consciousness, they would just continue suffering. Why? Because they don't have the means to find a route for them to be able to take out the suffering. They will just continue suffering. Someone who has a higher level of consciousness would at least try and figure things out themselves. They might find a solution in the world. If they're in the mode of passion, they will find a solution somehow or the other. They would struggle. Not that the solution is the answer, but they would at least have the means to think that perhaps I should explore a solution. But someone who is in the mode of ignorance, they just suffer through. Because, and they do worse. They intoxicate themselves, thinking they can take out their suffering. They do worse. Someone who's in the mode of goodness, there is a quality of faith which is already within their hearts. This quality of faith allows them to access a higher level of knowledge. A higher level of knowledge. I'm going to give you an example, an interesting example. You see, several years back, there was a gentleman from southern India, and this is in America. I come from New Jersey. So he was in New Jersey, but originally he hailed from southern India. He was a Muslim by birth from southern India, and he was also a Muslim in terms of his name and so on and so forth. He still held all the external aspects of it. He came into one of my congregation's gatherings, and I was quite surprised. And he became quite attached to me because I come from more or less the same place. So he was quite attached because of the language familiarity and so on. Then I asked him, I was curious. I said, what is it which brought you to Krishna consciousness? What is it which made you a vegetarian? How did you turn vegetarian? How did you move away from the practice of Islam and then come into Krishna consciousness, which is like a very big leap, because it's very difficult for us to even conceive of it. How did you do it? So he gave me an answer. I thought about it after many, many years. He said, when I was in southern India, he landed into some legal problems because there was something which turned up. He had a complication, and the complication became a legal problem. He had a legal problem. Because he had a legal problem, he didn't know how to resolve it. But because he was in the mode of goodness, you see, this direction comes from within. It's not something which you can just go and solve. Because he was in the mode of goodness, even though he belonged to a different practice, he was sattvic somewhat in his thought process. He was contemplative. It allows you to contemplate if you're in the mode of goodness. It allows you to discriminate. He thought about it, and then he said the local Hindu temple in southern India, he said, let me go and talk to the priest and see if they have any solution to resolve this legal problem that I have, a karmic solution. Which is quite amazing for someone who doesn't have or is not in touch with such paradigms to come in touch with the paradigm. He went and met the local priest in the local temple. The priest directed him to perform certain rituals for Lord Kartikeya. He is very much worshipped in southern India. So he said, So he says, go worship Lord Kartikeya, and you have to maintain a fast. You have to be vegetarian for a certain period of time, whatsoever. He gave him a very, very karmakandic process for him to get out of this situation. So this Muslim gentleman, he took it up quite seriously because he wanted to resolve his issues. He took it up quite seriously and then started practicing, and he actually found that 40 days or 50 days hence, the problem went away. It got resolved. See, that particular fact that it got resolved gave him faith in the practices of Hinduism, fundamental Hinduism. But because he was a sincere person, a sincere seeker as well, he didn't just come into the faith for solving problems, he wanted to reality know God. That allowed him to actually come in touch with Krishna consciousness during, I think, one of the Rath Yatra processions, or one of those in New Jersey. He received a card, he came, he started attending, and then he seeks me out wherever I'm giving classes, he comes and attends. And he chants 16 rounds. It's quite profound. Now, the point which I wanted to make was, what is it which allowed him to access the local priest? It was not just the fact that, he knew the local priest. Everybody in town knows there's a temple. Everybody in town knows there's a Hindu temple because it's big. Everybody knows there's a priest there. Perhaps they've heard of the fact that the Hindus believe in karma, and karma can be resolved through certain rituals, certain practices. This is also well known. It's not something which you can just, it is not something which is like special confidential knowledge. What is it which allowed him to access that? What allowed him to access that was because he had already had a foundation from the past. He had a foundation from the past, and he was contemplative. He already laid out a foundation, and he was contemplative. The foundation allowed him to come to the mode of goodness. The foundation from the past life allowed him to come to the mode of goodness, where he said, if I were to solve a problem, maybe I could ask this guy. He is outside my religious practice. The members of my community would perhaps ostracize me. They really wouldn't even allow me to come back into the community. These are all fears, but then he went and asked them. So what is it which allowed him to qualify? What was the quality of faith which allowed him to access a higher level of information which resolved the situation? The quality of faith has to be in the mode of goodness. If faith is in the mode of ignorance, the person suffers. If faith is in the mode of passion, they think they can do it themselves. And they try working their way out of the situation, which is seen in the modern world. People struggle their way out of their own situation by accessing, different faculties that are available here. If faith is in the mode of goodness, it allows you access to people who are in the mode of goodness. And because they are in the mode of goodness, they are in touch with the demigods. They are in touch with certain higher levels. Practitioners of Krishna consciousness need a foundation. This is a foundation, a platform for us to go higher. So if we want to develop a higher level of knowledge, and if you want to have a deeper level of faith, at the very fundamental level, one at least needs to be in the material mode of goodness. Sattva is so important because otherwise you will not have access to people, you will not have access to Shastra, you will not have access to the entities who are in the mode of goodness. So now we understand why in Krishna consciousness there is such emphasis on the practices of the regulative principles, such emphasis on being vegetarian, avoiding certain aspects of, like meat eating and all those things. Why do we avoid intoxication? Why do we avoid all of this? Because it disqualifies us. It makes it very difficult for us to access faith. And that quality of faith is required. That Shraddha is required. Without the Shraddha, one can't sit at the lotus feet of the spiritual master and say, I want to render humble service. It won't come. One will not be able to find the way into an ISKCON temple. One will not be attracted to Harinam. One will not be attracted to Prasad. You see, it is very simple that if one goes to that platform, then they have access to whatever is available on that platform. Shri Bhakti Devi, transcendental knowledge of Krishna consciousness, is way above that. But this is a platform for us to take off on. You see, this is a platform for us to just take off. So this is very fundamental. If we want to resolve issues, please do not look outside. The answers are in Prabhupada's books. The answers are in our practice. Issues of life can be resolved if one corrects their spiritual practice. It's not the other way around, that we fix life and then come into spiritual practice. People think that. Even after practicing Krishna consciousness, they think, I'm going to fix life. I'm going to hang my bead bag on the wall and I'll come back after I fix life. Life is meant to be fixed by the bead bag. It's the other way around. You see? That's a fundamental fact. Establish goodness. The more you increase the material mode of goodness, we will at least have the ability to follow through the rigors of our practice quite consistently. The inconsistency that we see in our practices has its root in being situated in passion. We sit down for japa in the morning. After 5 minutes, we want to take a walk. I'm better off walking and chanting. After 5 minutes of walking and chanting, I should sit down. This is passion. There's a struggle there in passion. You see? So there's a point here. The point I want to make is, there is a lack of knowledge which causes suffering, but if you want profound knowledge, you need to go to a point where you can at least receive profound knowledge. It can't be given at a very low level. It can't be. So this is number one. Number two, the second cause of suffering given by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the second cause of suffering is the false ego. The false ego makes us suffer. I walked into this temple, no one honored me. You see, no one did this for me, no one did that for me. I don't want to be a part of this congregation because someone said this to me. or they did this to me. This is all a part of suffering that comes because one has identified very closely with the body. They have identified very closely with the body. Someone has an identity which is of great importance, that they are male. So they get great suffering when there is any challenge to that identity in whatever form it may take. It happens, so is the case with women as well. They have this great identity that I'm a woman, so anything to that particular extent would start causing suffering. Professionally, all of us have identities. All of us have identities at the workplace. Anything happens to the identity at the workplace, we suffer intensely. I could lose my position, I have to maneuver, I have to do a little bit of political gaming for me to get there, I have to maintain my chair, I have to maintain my office. This is great suffering, this is great struggle. Why does it happen? There is this misidentification with the professional title. This is the false ego, there's suffering. Whenever we identify ourselves with anything in this world, separate from our identity of being a servant of Krishna, there is suffering. In the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we see intense mental suffering by Arjuna. Why is there such intense mental suffering? He was suffering because he identified himself as a grandson. He identified himself as a disciple. He identified himself as a cousin. He was just suffering like anything because he was assuming different identities, and all those identities were sources of distress. This is the false ego. The false ego is a number two source of distress. False ego, number 2. You see? Now the third aspect which Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is telling us is material attachments. Krishna talks about it in the Bhagavad Gita. You see, here's a challenge, Prabhus and Matajis. I spoke earlier of the mode of goodness. If we are situated in the mode of passion, passion produces desires. When we are in passion, we get attracted to things in the world. And because we get attracted to things in the world, we begin contemplating, wanting to acquire the objects. And once we start contemplating, we really want it. It becomes attachment. This attachment comes because of the mode of passion. Passion is a poison pill. It's helpful, it's really a poisonous substance. Passion develops desires. And those desires, 99% guaranteed, will not come to fruition. We begin window shopping in life. We start watching life and we start thinking, I need this and I need this and I need that. This is passion. This is passion. This is material mode of passion. And what happens when those desires do not get granted? When we do not get our desires granted, what happens to passion? What happens to it? Ignorance. Passion drops to ignorance. It goes even lower. Passion does not go higher. People, when they get disappointed, they drop in consciousness. So now they are out of the knowledge circle. They're going to be suffering even greatly. So passion is not so wonderful. We are trying to get out of it by engagement of our senses in the Lord's service. But please understand that we are again being challenged by this material mode of passion. We do not want to be in passion. We want to be in goodness. Because passion produces all kinds of desires. It does. So we have a certain goal saying, okay, that's our platform. The material mode of goodness is not our goal, but being situated there so that we could take off is a goal. We can serve Krishna in the mode of passion to purify eventually, but there has to be certain aspirations of wanting to get out and be situated, well situated to be able to practice the tenets of Krishna consciousness. Now we understand material attachments equals passion. Yeah, material attachments equals passion, which is the number one cause of suffering, because that is going to make sure that we don't get stuff which is supposed to come to us and we start pining for it, we start aggrieved, we become very, very agitated, and that agitation is again a lack of knowledge, it's suffering. Number 4, given by acaryas, the number 4 cause of suffering is envy. Envy is the number 4 cause of suffering. Why does envy occur? Can envy occur on its own? Can someone be envious on their own? Why does envy occur? I'm sorry? Comparison. So there is some desire, there is some material attachment, and since those desires and those attachments are there, person is looking at people who already have things and they're becoming envious. Enviousness is the number 4 reason. And the number 4 reason is also a cause of suffering, great suffering. But it comes due to attachment. Oh, I need something which the other person has. And that is also related to being situated in a lower level of consciousness. The 5th reason given by Sriman Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is mundane desires. The mundane desire part is just suffering. Mundane in the sense that I can go and I can be in Krishna consciousness, I can come in touch with a very profound process, I can come in touch with something which is so extraordinary, and I can still do things which I used to do 10 years back. This is a cause of suffering. Because now, once we come into Krishna consciousness, we are in higher knowledge. When you become higher in knowledge, then when you start seeking lower levels of engagement, that results in suffering. That results in suffering. This is someone who is used to a phenomenal diet. They're used to something wonderfully cooked, very nicely prepared. And then all of a sudden, they're being given things which are low quality. How are they going to be happy? You see, there was this devotee, it's a funny instance, he's still there. There was this devotee in the Boston temple, and in the Boston temple he was functioning, and he found that each and every day he practiced Krishna consciousness, he found his attraction to the world was going down. So he became quite panicky, and he said, oh my goodness, if I continue, then I will not enjoy life. Okay, I just can't enjoy life if I continue like this, because, oh my goodness, I'm not attracted to the world, and whatever is out there, if I'm not attracted to it, what is there in life anyways? So he kind of figured out, he was hearing Shravanam, he was hearing the classes quite diligently. The speakers kept talking about Vaishnava Parad, right? They kept talking about Vaishnava Parad. He heard those, and he said, if you do Vaishnava Parad, you'll be thrown out of the movement. He kept hearing those. He said, okay, I have a ploy. I know how to get out of this. Because he tried stepping away from the temple. He moved away from the temple outside. And even after moving away from the temple, he couldn't quite plug into the world. He couldn't plug into the world. And he decided that I must do something. So the temple started receiving anonymous phone calls. And this person used to call and used to be very abusive. He used to just, whoever picks up the phone, he used to become very obnoxious, shout at them, yell at them. And they didn't know what was this. It was very periodic. It kept happening week after week after week. And finally, after several weeks, they found out who it was. It was this person, this devotee, who wanted to be thrown out of the movement. And he had this extraordinary strategy of believing in Shastra, saying that if I were to offend Vaishnavas, Krishna will throw me out, and if he throws me out, I can enjoy life again. He had this strategy, which didn't quite work out, but Krishna in the heart knew that ultimately, okay, this is why you're doing it, I'm going to stop you. So he again came back, begged forgiveness, and joined the temple. It was pretty amazing. So the point which I'm trying to make here is that after coming into Krishna consciousness, after hearing so many classes, and after hearing and coming in touch with such amazing, sublime knowledge and happiness, if someone still wants to taste what's available out there as mundane desires, then their suffering is quite intense. Their suffering is quite intense because they have been purified. They have a higher level of knowledge. Because they have a higher level of knowledge and a higher level of consciousness, they can't really relate to what's going on outside, and they're going to suffer if they just plug in. Okay? So these are 5 causes of distress. The Kleshagni is the removal of distress, and that is being given to us by our acaryas. Okay? Now, what is it which our acaryas gave us? We again spoke earlier on about the legacy. Now we are coming to the solution part. What is the legacy that was given to us by the acaryas? What is it which the practitioners of Krishna consciousness in 500 years back, what did they say? The scriptural truth is that they practiced 5 tenets very seriously on a daily basis. They practiced 5 tenets of Krishna consciousness. The first thing that they did was they figured out that they need to develop a higher level of faith. How do you develop a higher level of faith? You develop a higher level of faith by coming in touch with those who have a higher level of faith. When someone has seen the truth, they have the ability to take their faith and deposit it into our hearts through the idea of sound. The Guru takes his faith and deposits it into our heart. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya, Chitete Koryaikya. What is the transformative principle of the Guru's words? The Guru's faith is because of his experiences. He has seen Krishna. He's a Tattvadarshi. When such a Tattvadarshi has the ability to simply chant, then that chanting has the ability to enter into our ears and practically has the ability to give us faith. What did Srila Prabhupada do to start the movement? In Tompkins Park, what did he do? He had a pair of kartals. He had no one else. He chanted. Because his level of faith in Krishna was due to his experiences with Krishna. He was talking to Krishna. He was actually associating with the Lord personally. He carried an immense level of faith. And when he chanted, that faith transmitted itself through the holy names. Who overheard that faith? Who overheard the holy names? Their hearts became transformed. So the number one benchmark, the number one quality that we need to have is to have the ability for sadhu sangha. Please, doesn't matter how bad we feel, stick with the sadhus. Because something wonderful will happen. Even if someone does not have the expertise to give you direct guidance on how to resolve an issue, at the very least they will tell you, read Srila Prabhupada's books. Or they might tell you, come to temple, let's listen to a class. They might be able to give you information and direct you to something which is far, far more powerful, which has a solution in mind. Sadhu Sangha is most important. Right? Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koryaikya. Krishna consciousness is a powerful, dynamic process. At every level of Krishna consciousness, the chanter of the holy names is given experiences. Krishna is like this personality who, for example, takes away $1 million from us. Right? For example, someone takes $1 million from you or £1 million, and he says, I'm going to pay you back by paying you back £5,000 every week. Okay? If every week the person who takes away the £1 million pays us £5,000, will we have faith that he's going to be giving us the $1 million back or not?
Yes.
Yeah, that is exactly what happens in Krishna consciousness. When strictly practiced by practitioners and very sincere practitioners who have their goals clearly set, they have experiences as they make advancement. Those experiences strengthen their faith. And because their faith is strengthened, when they speak with conviction. And that conviction has the ability to destroy our nations, our lack of knowledge, and enters into our heart and produces faith in our hearts. So it's very important to come in touch with practitioners. Even when we go to Vrindavan, we go to Mayapur, we don't have the qualification to see the Dham, but we see the Dham through ears. We hear about the pastimes of the Lord. You can go to Vrindavan, you can go to Mayapur, and you can just look at the gutter, you can look at a few pigs, loitering around in certain side streets, and you could come back saying, it is not for me. Or you could hear about the wondrous nature of Vrindavan from a qualified practitioner who has deep faith and who has had darshan, whose faith is very profound. And then we can see the Dham by hearing. So hearing is the number one qualification. And hearing happens when we come in touch with those who are doing kirtan. Kirtan is to speak, to chant as well. The more serious a speaker, the more serious a chanter, the greater the profundity and the effect they would have. You have Aindra Prabhu, for example. How many of you here are Aindra fans? Aindra Prabhu fans? Practically all of us. You see? How was it possible that he could just sit, how could he just sit in a little room in Vrindavan and start a kirtan revolution amongst young practitioners of Krishna consciousness around the world? He just sat down. He never traveled out since 1984. He left Chicago, he was distributing books. He went and sat down, he did kirtan. What was it which was so attractive about his kirtan? It was not so much the mellows of music, by the way. It wasn't. It was his attachment to the holy names. It was his experiences, his faith in the holy names. And when we heard it, we became enthused. That started the Kirtan revolution. He had real desires to taste the pure name. And those desires came upon the ears of those who heard his Kirtan. And they became enthused. So let's understand, Sadhu Sangha is a number one priority. Be ready to pay any price to get Sadhu Sangha. And never leave the shelter of sadhus. Never. Now, never do that. Because this is a number one tenet. This is the practice that was exemplified by the Goswamis. They used to treat each other with such great respect. And they were so attached to each other's service. And they looked after each other because the Sadhu Sangha, they thrived in it. They really thrived. This was given to us by them. Look at the practice of Sadhu Sangha. This was what done by them. It was actually being done. Srila Jiva Goswami was inspired by his uncles, Srila Rupa and Sri Sanatana. And then he inspired Srinivas Acharya, other contemporaries. They took the literature, distributed it in Bengal from Vrindavan. All of this is because there was Sadhu Sangha. They held this. They never thought that I have it all. They never really thought I have it all. They really felt that they had to be with others so that they could gain from the experiences of others. Which is what our practice is all about. You can gain immensely from the experiences of others. Krishna comes in so many flavors into the hearts of his devotees. Number one, Sadhu Sangha. Number two, and so sorry if people are not familiar with the word sadhu. A sadhu, as defined by scripture, is one who is completely dependent on Krishna. A sadhu is one who is dependent and who is trying to depend on the holy names. That's the definition of our scripture. Now, Nama Smaran is the second tenet which was followed by our acaryas. The second bullet, number 2. Nama Smaran. Remembering the holy names, which is practically doing japa. Japa. None of them had any reason to do japa. They were in the spiritual sky. But they were very, very serious about their practice of japa on a daily basis. Nama Smaran. This is number 2. Number 3, Nama Smaran is to do japa. Nama Kirtan is to broadcast the holy names on the streets and with instruments and so on. Number 3 is Bhagavat Shravana. The Srimad Bhagavatam has been written specifically for the servants of Lord Chaitanya. For the followers of Lord Chaitanya it has been written. The followers of Lord Chaitanya are practically so fortunate that they are being given something which no one else has. If we read Srimad Bhagavatam in the 10th canto, we see something very, very astonishing. What is astonishing? Mother Devaki, the mother of Krishna, feels completely unqualified to have him as a son. She makes that statement in Srimad Bhagavatam in the 10th canto. She says, I'm unqualified to be your mother. Your forearm form, what will people think? Who will believe me that my son is the Supreme Lord? She feels unqualified to have him as a son, which essentially means that she is not on the same platform of Shuddha Bhakti, same relationship as Mother Yashoda. Mother Yashoda has no confusion. This is my son. Mother Devaki has confusion in Mathura. Please understand. Mother Yashoda has no confusion, Mother Devaki has confusion. What is it which Lord Chaitanya has given us? Lord Chaitanya is not taking us to Mathura, he is giving us Vraja. He is giving us the confidential relationship of Mother Yashoda, which even Mother Devaki did not have the qualification to pursue. Please understand that we are entering into something which is so sublime and so confidential that even Mother Devaki did not have access to it. And Lord Chaitanya is distributing it on the streets. Lord Nityananda is distributing it on the streets, and we are coming in touch with it. Do we understand how special this movement is? It is extraordinarily special. For those who are entering into Lord Chaitanya's movement and are savoring the holy names and they're dedicating themselves to the distribution of the holy names, the Bhagavatam becomes revealed. The Srimad Bhagavatam is revealed to those who are sincere chanters of the holy name. They come in touch with sadhus. They chant sincerely, Nama Smaran. Bhagavat Shravana, which is reading Srimad Bhagavatam, begins after Namasmaran. If we don't chant sincerely, we can't understand Srimad Bhagavatam. Why did Srila Prabhupada say Bhagavad Gita first, Srimad Bhagavatam next? Because to approach the Srimad Bhagavatam, we have to understand the Bhagavad Gita. We have to take Krishna's words. Krishna is saying, you can't understand me unless you approach a Tattvadarshi. Krishna is giving us basic instructions in the Bhagavad Gita. Those basic instructions are then taken and implemented, and we go to the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, if we are sincere chanters, we are able to relish the stories of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhagavat Shravana is so profound. Those who have completely accepted and are relishing Srimad Bhagavatam and are living Srimad Bhagavatam, their pastimes are recorded in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. That's why it's postgraduate study. It's postgraduate because you have to qualify yourself going from Bhagavad Gita to Bhagavatam, and then to be able to chant, and then to be able to understand the behavior of those who are in love. Their behavior is a behavior of madness. It's divine madness. How can we understand divine madness when we don't have a clue on what it is all about? That's why it's postgraduate study. And after Bhagavad Shravana, our acaryas are talking about Srimurti Sevaya, which is to worship the deity of the Lord and to reside in Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada did not ask us all to go to Vrindavan and Mathura. He never did. He never did. He never told us go to Mayapur. He said, yes, go to Mayapur, go to Vrindavan once a year, recharge yourself, go out and preach. His instructions was, make Newcastle Vrindavan, make Newcastle Mathura, make Newcastle Mayapur Dham. That was the instruction which Prabhupada gave us. He never told us, go pack your bags and then get a room and then go do your little japa there. No. He said, be on the battlefield, preach. Do your bit for Lord Chaitanya's movement, because that's the way out in our system. So these are 5 tenets given by our acharyas. Observe this. Please observe this, and you will notice that if you set this as your goal, Sadhu Sangha, Namasmaran, Bhagavat Shravana, Srimurti Sevaya, Mathuravas, set this as your goal. Benchmark yourself on a year after year basis. Examine if my Sadhu Sangha and my enthusiasm for Sadhu Sangha has improved. Please examine and benchmark yourself and calibrate yourself to see if our ability and our enthusiasm for chanting has improved. Has our ability and our enthusiasm for hearing, has it improved? Do we really want to worship the deities in a profound, nice way? How much are we putting into it? Do we really want to experience the nature of Vrindavan, the confidential aspects of Vrindavan? Year after year, is this improving? Are we level or are we deaccelerating? Krishna consciousness is a strange business. Why is it so? Because if you're not accelerating, you will be deaccelerating. One cannot cruise along. There is no cruise speed in our movement. There isn't any. You're either accelerating or deaccelerating. If you're climbing a mountain, please understand that at every peak of the mountain, there are multiple peaks till you reach the summit. Every peak of the mountain, one has to be able to examine where they are in terms of their goals. These are the goals. We should never distract ourselves from these goals. If we adjust life to come to a situation of being able to have a greater quality of Sangha, greater quality of Namasmaran, adjust our life to have a greater quality of being able to read the Srimad Bhagavatam, hear the Srimad Bhagavatam, and then be able to associate and help the worship of the deities. And then eventually, the place of residence would transform itself into Vrindavan. We will carry Vrindavan in our hearts. This is Prabhupada's system. This is the system that was given by the 6 Goswamis. Nothing need to be reinvented. We need to benchmark and start calibrating. Every one of you are in some way or the other being professionally associated. If you've been managing projects, please tell me if you are going to be doing the same thing that you did year after year after year, are you going to be promoted? Is your business, is your office going to promote you if you're going to do exactly the same thing year after year? It ain't going to do that. You're going to have to be able to improve, increase, become more intense, and then prove yourself in so many different ways, then you get a bump. Why would it be any different in Krishna consciousness? Why should spirituality be any different? when such a profound, confidential, and rare gift has been given, why would they expect us to be any different than if we had to achieve something wonderful here in this world? This is the foundation. This is the legacy that's been given to us. If this legacy becomes the goal of life, and then everything else is adjusted to achieve this goal and to increase and improve upon this goal, every one of us has an equal opportunity. That's Prabhupada's promise. Srila Prabhupada's promise. Years back in New Vrindavan, there was a conference, seminar given by my spiritual master. I had the good fortune of being able to sit next to two very senior mothers in our movement, two Prabhupada disciples, very senior. Mother Rukmini, and then I forget the name of the other mother. And the idea was for us to be able to share realizations. And I had nothing to share, obviously. But they had such many, many realizations to share. And one of the mothers who was next to me, she shared a realization. She said in the late 60s, Prabhupada used to keep in touch with his disciples via snail mail. He used to write, they used to write. And devotees used to write 2-3 pages, 4 pages to Srila Prabhupada. And he used to reply, and the reply used to come 2 months later because he was in some other part of the world. He used to mail it in. He used to read every letter and he used to reply. And the whole temple will gather around to read the reply, even though it was written to someone specific, because it was so rare to receive such direct instructions from Prabhupada. So she asked them in so many words, 3 pages. She was very young, very dedicated, very sincere, which is a great thing, because if you're doing 40 years of this, that's amazing. So she had done many, many years of seva consistently through all the different, ups and downs of life and this movement as well. So she had many deep realizations. So when she wrote to Prabhupada in late 60s, when she was very young, saying, how do I go back to Godhead? But she had written a very descriptive 3-4 page essay, because she was writing to the spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada replied, saying, chant 16 rounds and follow the 4 regulative principles. I will take you back to Godhead. What does it mean? It essentially means several things. Number one, Prabhupada gave us an extraordinarily watered down standard to observe. He kind of put the standard down to suit those who are coming to him. So he said 16 rounds, regulative principles. This is watered down. On its own merit, this does not have the capacity to take us anywhere. So what is happening here is quite amazing. On its own merit, it doesn't have the capacity to take us. But if we sincerely adhere to his words, he is practically complementing our effort with his mercy. It is his mercy which is going to practically take us back. Krishna is not going to say that he chanted 16 rounds, he followed the principles, he was sincere, I need him back. He is going to say, this is Prabhupada's man and we want him back. Or this is Prabhupada's daughter, we want her back. So the point which you're trying to make here is, what we have been given and what we are trying to achieve with that are completely disproportionate. Who is actually weighing the balance down? Who is doing all the heavy lifting? It is the Acharya Varga. It is the Guru Parampara who are doing all the heavy lifting. At the very least, we just want to follow what they are saying sincerely, so that when they do the heavy lifting, we are not giving them too much of a burden. At the very least. You see? So, I want to end here because I was given this amount of time. And I just want to summarize very quickly. We started out by understanding that this process is very special. We understood that this process is one where we have to increase on a year by year basis our understanding of our relationship. This is the nature of true spirituality. If the relationship between us and the Lord is not revealed, and if that is not the goal of any spiritual process, discard it. It's not even bona fide. It's not bona fide. True spiritual practice has to offer us sambandha, abhideya, prayojana. They have to be able to tell us that you practice this and you will know yourself, you will know God. You see? So we have that going here. That's number one. Number two, we come in touch with this process, and we looked at the fact that we came in touch with such amazing personalities. And our process today is being practically inspired by those who practiced very sincerely 500 years back. They did not even wear proper clothing. They sat under trees with their bead bags. Their writings are what are propelling this movement. Please understand, they did something very, very simple. So we want to look at what was the simple legacy that's been passed on, which has achieved so much. Because why try reinvent the wheel when something so simple has been given? So we looked at it, and we looked at the fact that people who are a part of this process also face distress. So we looked at the 5 causes of distress, and then we also looked at what is it which is required to enter into a proper level of faith. So we talked about consciousness, we talked about using the mode of goodness as a platform, and then we looked at the 5 main tenets that have been given by our acaryas, which is the legacy they have passed on to us. And we said, if we protect this legacy, it's guaranteed we're going back, because Srila Prabhupada has said so. Please let us just protect this legacy. And this is a legacy which we just have to adhere to. This is our benchmark. If this improves year after year, we can know for sure that we're on the track, we're on the right track. If this deteriorates, then there's a need for concern, and there's a need for seeking out help. If we are in the company of people who are sincere, then we have the ability to seek help. If we have the ability to think that we are nothing, then we will be able to reach out. If we think we already have it, we made it, then we will not have the ability to reach out. So there's no help available for those who think they're already there. There's a lot of help available for those who think they're here. That's the other part to it. So I want to end here, and I want to see if there are any questions. So thank you very much for allowing me to share my few thoughts, realizations. Any questions at all, please? Yes, Mataji.
I want to know exactly what is suffering and pain. How is it they different from each other?
Yeah. Well, the example that I gave was of someone who is in pain, right? And they are suffering. But the moment they know that the pain has a certain source, it can be cured, it is going to end in a certain time frame, then the suffering goes away. It's like this. You're a mother. I can give you an example. Every lady who has born a child and who has gone through a period of pregnancy, they all know that there is a certain amount and a great amount of pain that is involved in actually going through the pregnancy. Okay? But even though there's so much pain, there isn't any suffering. Why is it so?
Because at the end you will have...
Exactly. So that was the point I was trying to make. That's the distinction. Yeah? So if we know why we are doing what we are doing, and if we take it up, and if there's knowledge, then the complete knowledge allows us to convert this pain and suffering into pain. And even if there is pain, we don't have a problem. Every disciple has a duty to take on pain on behalf of the spiritual master, which is the principle of our acaryas. Every disciple has a duty. There's a duty here. They should be ready to do that. Okay? Which is the reason why I'm saying that kind of pain, there is no suffering, because it's being done with love for the spiritual master.
Can severe pain, if it is removed, that suffering related to the pain goes away?
Does it go away? Is that what you're asking me?
Will go away. Suffering will go away. Suffering related to that severe pain.
In some cases, yes. You see, sometimes some people could be in intense pain because of a loss. You see? So that situation has ended, it's gone, but the suffering can continue for many, many years. So the point which I'm trying to make is that there's a need for knowledge. There is a need for knowledge to know why we are suffering. There's a need for knowledge to know when it will end. And then there's a need for knowledge to know how it can end and whether there is a process to end it. See? When everything is given to you on how to end this suffering, then such a process is very celebrated. Our process is that. Our acharyas have told us, Kleshagni is the first goal or step of Krishna consciousness. Everyone present here even after a preliminary practice of Krishna consciousness of even 1 year, they find relief from their anxieties. It's a fact. If you sincerely chant and practice Krishna consciousness even for 1 year, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, there is relief from anxieties. So what is that? That relief is also a semblance or a fraction of experience of liberation that's being offered at a very preliminary stage by our practice. You see? I sometimes wonder, why would people not pay any price to get in line for this? Why wouldn't? Yeah. Any question? Any other question, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu, thank you for your nice class. I'm just thinking, because you're extolling the high benefits of practicing Krishna consciousness, what the goal is, what the benefits are. But at the beginning of your class, you were saying like 90% of people who are involved in Krishna consciousness are suffering. So that seems to be a contradiction to me. Just like you were saying just now, if you're actually practicing the process of sadhana bhakti, then you get relief from suffering. My understanding is, especially nowadays, that we have to take personal responsibility for our own spiritual life. When I joined, when we were living in the temple, very often you're carried along by your peers like that. But nowadays it seems that you need knowledge, but at the same time you also need to be aware of what's required in terms of actually making progress yourself. And if you're doing that, then you're obviously we all experience different distresses in our lives. But if you actually think that you are suffering, to me, then you're not in Krishna consciousness.
Okay, it's a very good point. What I didn't mean to say was, I was merely meaning to exemplify that most practitioners, if they are indeed suffering, which means that they are not following the tenets and the basic practices which are required, even though they are part of the process, they are not really following it, which is the point I was trying to make. I was merely wanting to emphasize that there were very basic core practices that were given by our acaryas. If those core practices are done, so much is being given in return, and that is not being done, then it becomes problematic. So it's very simple to benchmark ourselves and move towards it. I was making a statement that if we as practitioners, perhaps a mistake was to use 99%, I would probably refrain from using a percentage, because I really don't know, to be honest. That I probably would want to take that back. But the point is that if we are suffering, anybody is suffering, anyone who hears this class is indeed suffering, and you are being a part of Krishna consciousness, you are a part of it, and you feel aggrieved, you feel you're suffering, at that point in time, there is a need for you to start looking at your own personal practices so that you could improve upon it, so that you can get into it, get out of it as well. And if you need help for it, reach out. I guess that perhaps is the statement I was wanting to make.
Also, in the beginning of the class, you were talking about approaching tattva in order to gain knowledge of Krishna. But what about bhakti? I mean, because Krishna also emphasizes that in the Bhagavad Gita, that he's only understood, he's only known by bhakti. So isn't that what we should really be emphasizing, in our lives, is to become devoted somehow or other, even though we have all these inebriaties, and all these anarthas, and it's just like we're attracted to this, that, and the other. But should we just be encouraged to try and do things in a devotional way?
But where will the devotion come from? Because Bhakti Devi is independent. It is being granted by the practitioner. Krishna doesn't have the authority to grant bhakti. It is said in our scriptures. The first argument which is being made by our acharyas is that even Krishna does not have the authority to give bhakti, because Bhakti Devi is independent. Then the question becomes as to who has the authority to give bhakti. Then it is being said, those who carry bhakti in their hearts have the ability to give bhakti. So coming in touch with the practitioners of bhakti gives us bhakti. And coming in touch with the practitioners of bhakti is being told by Krishna, saying you have to have tattva darshan. Come in touch with someone who has had tattva darshan and who has the profundity of knowledge and bhakti in his heart, and he can deposit or she can deposit it in yours. So that was the point I was trying to make. Yeah. Thank you for your enlightened comments. Your name, Prabhu, if you don't mind? Dhananjay Prabhu. Thank you.
It's a very small question, Prabhu. I understand that you are from the Sri Sampradaya,
No, I'm actually from the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. That is my president.
Well,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but you're from that area of Sri
Yes,
Sampradaya,
of course. Yes.
Ramananda Sampradaya.
Yes.
And I understand the ultimate goal is to reach Goloka, that is according to Vaishnava Gaudiya Sampradaya. But when you follow Sri Sampradaya and they don't
Emphasize.
emphasize Goloka, and their target is probably in a different.
It's Vaikuntha.
It's Vaikuntha.
Hmm.
So if they go to Vaikuntha, do they have to come back to go to Goloka?
Let's put it this way. The way we look at it is that the practitioners of a certain Siddhanta, number one, you bring up a nice point. The Siddhanta that we follow has an absolutely phenomenal goal, the entry into which others can't offer or they don't talk about it. The name of Srimati Radharani is not found mentioned by the other acaryas, which is how confidential the practice of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is. It is not mentioned. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his followers are those who had the capacity to write about such confidential teachings. So we really are, in one sense, a very, very niche practice in one sense. So that's a good point. Now, secondly, those who aspire to want to serve Lord Nrsingadev in his abode, or those who want to serve Lord Narayan in Vaikuntha, in one reality, they don't really aspire for anything else. There can be extraordinarily focused followers of Lord Narayan. There's nothing wrong with that. There can be extraordinarily dedicated followers of Lord Shiva. They would say, I don't want to go anywhere, I want to be with him because they are so attached to him. Nothing wrong with that. Okay? So the point I'm trying to make here is there is good fortune where we have come into the practice of Krishna consciousness, where we've been given entrance into this very confidential aspect of Godhead, about knowing about him. But it doesn't quite mean that everybody should practically give up what they're doing and come here, because they are also well situated if they're following a bona fide sampradaya. If there are 4 bona fide sampradayas, if they are following the sampradaya, they're well situated, they have this great attachment. You see, I can give you an example, okay, perhaps. When my mother visited us several years back, she began chanting 16 rounds, began worshipping Gaur Nitai, and she developed some real attachment to the practice of bhakti, but even though her heart was in the Sri Sampradaya, because that's where she grew up in. So several years later, she expressed to me, saying, I want to get initiated. I really want to find my guru and I want to get initiated. How do I go about it? You see, what I told her was, I didn't really tell her, go into one of my ISKCON temples and you will find your guru. That's where you ought to be doing. Because I knew her heart was already well situated in the practice of Sri Sampradaya. That's a bona fide Sampradaya according to scripture. But I gave her instruction which I hope would help her. I told her, because of the faith which I had in Prabhupada, I told her, worship Srila Prabhupada on a daily basis and ask him to direct you. If he directs you, then accept the direction, wherever this direction went. Then she began sincere worship of Srila Prabhupada, and including my own spiritual master. And in due course, she found that she was accepted by an acharya in her station. She became initiated in the Sri Sampradaya. You see, the point which I'm trying to make here is that there are devotees who are dedicated to Lord Narayan. There are devotees who are completely dedicated to Krishna in Mathura, in Dwaraka. There are devotees who would think nothing of anything else other than Braja. You see? So he is actually surrounded by very special devotees at different levels. So there's really nothing wrong in going there to Vaikuntha. So we don't want to really send a message across saying that the other sampradaya and what they are giving is, deficient. For us, since I am interested in Braja, I cannot think of anything but that. But I really can't tell them that you shouldn't, you should. There's no disturbance there. Does it make sense, Prabhu? Thank you.
Also, out of 6 Goswamis, majority of them are originally from South India.
Right.
And but somehow the message from these highly acclaimed Goswamis, they didn't go back to propagate Radha Shakti. What is the reason?
Well, several reasons. There's a time, place, and circumstances.
Yeah.
You see, one of the things, when Lord Chaitanya introduced the movement, he visited South India. He spent an enormous amount of time in South India. He did, quite remarkably. There are many confidential spots that he visited. There are many, many temples that he visited in southern India, in Tamil Nadu specifically. And the point which I'm trying to make here is now, after Prabhupada's advent and after Prabhupada's mission became successful in the West, and then came back to India, we are now seeing the movement of Lord Chaitanya take on great, great proportions in southern India as well. Srila Prabhupada is fulfilling Srila Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. So the point is, it is spreading, it is being accepted. In fact, we are greatly respected. If they see the Gaudiya Vaishnava Tilak in a South Indian temple, they honor you. Why so? Because they know we are very sincere in doing whatever is being done. They really honor. They are sincere in their own practice, but they respect. Oh, you've gone through great lengths, you're spreading the mission around the world. They respect you so much. It's because of that. Yes, please.
I was just wondering that in
Lord.
mode of goodness, you can go to Krishna consciousness, but in mode of passion, can you straight go to Krishna consciousness, or you have to go to the mode of goodness and then progress from there?
Okay, first I would like to make a clarification. The mode of goodness is a platform. One cannot get to Krishna consciousness from the mode of goodness. It is simply a platform, a condition which is favorable. It's favorable condition. Okay? So one could be in the mode of goodness and they may go nowhere. The point is, it's a material mode, but it affords you an opportunity and perhaps a foundation which is much better than passion and ignorance. Okay? Does one have to come to the mode of goodness for them to take off? One has to begin coming into a temple of Krishna consciousness. That's all they need to do. They don't need to work individually on the modes. They just have to take up the practice, and automatically everything else that has to happen would happen if they are a part of the atmosphere and they follow the tenets. Any other question? Comment? Yes, Prabhu.
I hope it's not too off the point, but you were talking about envy, and I was wondering, which I know that a lot about that, but I was wondering why rich people are envious of poor people. Like for poor persons to be envious of a rich person, it's like, yeah, well, they've got the car and they've got this and got, you know what I mean? It's like, but you also find rich people not treating poor people very nicely, you know what I mean? They're not thinking like, well, it's just this little guy and he hasn't got anything, so I'm going to be nice to him, and you know what I mean? So why is it rich people are envious of poor people?
Rich people, okay, perhaps I can qualify this.
Not these rich people, they're wonderful, they're very nice.
Okay.
By my standards, they're rich.
Yeah, but the point I wanted to make is as follows. You see, envy is the nature that's found in snakes. A poisonous, venomous snake does not want the other person to exist. It does not distinguish if a person is 3-year-old with a small little stick, or the person is 30 years old with a big stout stick which can beat the snake down to death. It does not distinguish. It just strikes down and kills whoever is in front. Okay? That's the true nature of envy, its venomousness. So in that sense, it need not be a situation of either having or not having certain things. One can carry such qualities in them and can be envious to the point where we don't want the other party to exist. Sure. Okay. Envious. No, it is true. It is true. When we are envious of Krishna, because it's Krishna's creation. Yeah. Envy is a quality which is not celebrated whatsoever. It's dangerous. I think I'll have a last question or comment. before we move to the next part of the program, I guess. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Oh, Premanande.
Hari and love.